Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
loud and clear.
yes, we can hear you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amina Adam, and I'll be your moderator for today. This is the 6th week of this quarter's mentorship program, and we are going to be talking about AFCFTA, that's the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. While we wait for our mentors to join the call, I'll be reading out a few announcements. Hussein, if you can help me share the screen, please. Thank you so much, Hussein. Okay, as we all know, Jiipcc Mentorship and Internship Program is a quarterly program for students and young professionals across Africa. Mentees are afforded the opportunity to access valuable advice, training, network, mentorship, internship, discussion forums, industry updates, and resource materials from experienced mentors. The program seeks to encourage continuous training, development, and evolution in Africa and around the world. You can watch our videos, of course, most of us know that, by searching for Jiipcc on YouTube and Facebook, hashtag Jiipcc The objectives of the program include: number one, to provide easy access to quality professional guidance, training, and resource materials for students and young professionals in Africa. Two, to facilitate dialogue and network among experienced and less experienced practitioners and stakeholders. Three, to transform mentees into mentors and leaders for the next generation. And lastly, to facilitate further mentorship, internship, scholarship, and just job placements for the mentees. As we all know, this is a combined class, the second combined class for this quarter. Jiipcc gives you the opportunity to have a 30 minutes one-on-one mentorship with your favorite Jiipcc mentor. You can get hacks, life secrets, life lessons, and directions from your favorite mentors. Also, we are pleased to announce that we are introducing a new course. Sorry, you're saying I'm too fast. Okay, thank you. We are introducing a new course that's entertainment, business, and law. So if you're interested, you can apply for the next quarter. That's the third quarter for this year. There are also other courses that we didn't take this year, this quarter, such as blockchain, NFT, and metaverse. You can apply if you're interested. You can also help us share the flyers to your friends, colleagues, and loved ones that may be interested in the courses. Thank you very much. Okay, I'll be introducing our mentors for today. We have two mentors. The first one is going to be Ms. Teniola Tayo. Teniola is a policy advisor with a focus on trade, investment, regional integration, and development issues in Nigeria and Africa. She has a master's degree in development management from the London School of Economics and a first degree from the University of Ghana. She's the principal advisor at Aloynet Advisors with a wealth of experience in her field. Teniola has previously worked as a consultant with organizations such as the Institute for Security Studies, Supply Chain Africa, Africa Policy Research Institute, the United Nations Development Program, and the Inter-American Development Bank. She has also worked as a senior legislative aide with the Nigerian Senate and a consultant with the Office of the Vice President. She is based in Abuja and is a Chevening scholar and a fellow of the European University Institute School of Transnational Governance, sorry about that, and the London School of Economics Program for African Leadership. Thank you, Ms. Teniola, for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you here with us. Our second mentor for today is going to be Mr. Leonard Ugbaja. Leonard Ugbaja is a legal practitioner with expertise in trade law and policy, competition and consumer protection, investment climate, and private sector development. He's the founder and executive director of Center for Trade and Business Environment Advocacy Limited, GTE, CTBA. He is also the principal consultant at TBE Advisory Limited. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Leonard. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. I'm going to check if our mentors are here with us. Okay, I can see Mr. Teniola is here with us. Thank you for joining us, Ma.
Thank you, Amina. Thank you to be here.
You're welcome. Can you please, I would like to have an overview of the topic from you, Ma.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ma, we can hear you clearly.
Okay, you can see me now, isn't it?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I mean, the topic is the African Continental Free Trade Area. I think with a little bit of a focus this time around on services, that's on financial services, if I'm right. But then an overview on the AFCFTA, which is the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's an agreement that forms part of the African Union's Agenda 2063. So the African Union has decided that, you know, they have designed a plan that they hope will lead to African development, or at least an improvement in the lives of Africans by 2063. So I guess a lot of us are wondering how old we're going to be by that time, or whether we're going to see it. But then the AFCFTA is a flagship of that agenda, and it's trying to increase intra-African trade in goods and services, but not just trade in random goods and services, but the trading goods and services that are produced in Africa, as one way to drive industrialization in African countries, and also to transform the economies from economies that only export things like crude oil or copper or cobalt, you know, to economies that export things like cars or machine parts and just more advanced goods and services. Why should they export more advanced goods and services? Because there's more money there. When you export raw materials, you're getting lower value for your exports. But when you export petrol instead of crude oil, then you're getting higher value. And that higher value is good for two categories of people. It's good for your citizens because it's more money in their pockets, but it's also good for the government because it's more revenues also in their pockets. And these revenues will help with public services like healthcare and education. So that's the AFCFTA. The AFCFTA itself is not currently being implemented, but it really depends on who you ask. Some people may say that the AFCFTA is being implemented, but since this is a forum of lawyers, according to the trade lawyers, which I'm not a trade lawyer, but according to the trade lawyers, the minimum requirements for actually commenting the AFCFTA as a legal instrument has not been met because the rules of origin negotiations are still ongoing. So the rules of origin, how to explain the rules of origin? I think we've explained it before in a different session, but it's just, you know, what you need to determine whether a good was made in one country or another. So I'm wearing a button shirt now. If it's made of many different materials, I'm sure it's synthetic. So there's a question of where the synthetic fiber was made. What about the labor that went into it? What about the machines that were used to make it? Even what about the buttons? You know, where were the buttons made? So the rules of origin sets out a minimum requirements. Maybe it could say that about 80% of the things that have gone into making the shirts need to have been from Nigeria for this good to be certified as made in Nigeria. or you could say 50%, you know, that if you just meet 50%, then you can say that you made the good in your country, even though maybe you imported the synthetic fibers and maybe you just cut and sewed it in your country and things like that. So those rules of origin are still being negotiated. They're almost done, but they've been stuck at a level for a while now. I think there are two things that are holding them back, the one for textiles and the one for cars. But when it comes to services, they're trying to really advance as much as possible. I know that they've been asked to send their services offers. And services just relates to many things, because with the AFCFTA protocols, there's the protocol on trading goods, there's a protocol on trading services, but there's also there's an e-commerce protocol, so e-commerce digital trade, which in some ways still falls under services. And I'll say that the developments under the AFCFTA when it comes to services is linked to the broader developments in the global trade space when it comes to trading services. So one example is that the WTO Public Forum for this year, that's the World Trade Organization Public Forum for this year, is also looking at services or digital trade and how it can help with sustainability. So in the African side, or on the African side, we're also trying not to be left behind and talking about trading services, because a lot of our economies have more advantages in trading services. Why? Because we have a very low manufacturing base when it comes to goods, and then we struggle to export goods, like in a country like Nigeria, where to take your goods across the border, overseas, over land, you may pay a lot of money that may affect your competitiveness. So Amina, am I out of time? Good? I can't hear you.
No, ma, you can carry on.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead, ma.
How much more time do I have?
About 6 minutes.
6 minutes. Okay, that's good. And I think I saw some questions, because I think now I should answer the questions that were asked, isn't it?
No, ma, we have a session for that. We have yes.
Okay, so now it's just for the overview.
Yes, ma.
Okay. I mean, with the AFCFTA, I mentioned the protocol in trading goods, the protocol for trading services. These are the phase 1 protocols. Then you also have the phase 2 protocols. So you have things like the protocol on investment, you have the protocol on intellectual property rights, the protocol on competition. You also have the protocol on women and youth in trade, which was added after the fact. So when the agreement was launched in January 2021, we didn't have a protocol on women and youth in trade. But of course, it's a process that is learning, right? Because I mean, at the time when the agreement was launched, people started saying, women are going to be left. I mean, not that they're going to be left out, but because the people that find it easier to trade across borders are the large firms. So the Dangotes, as one example, Dangote has been trading across borders in Africa for a while. And those large firms are often owned by men. You have women usually at maybe running small and medium-sized firms for many reasons. I mean, there are structural reasons in our societies that make that the case. Things like women not being able to access the kinds of financing, or because they're overburdened with other kinds of work. So they put together that protocol just to make sure that there's trade facilitation for women, but also for young people, because in Africa, in Nigeria, most of us are young. I think Nigeria's numbers, I can't remember now how many percentage, 70% under the age of 30 or something like that. So those are the protocols that make up the AFCFTA. The current state of things is that even though the AFCFTA has not been launched, or even though trading under the AFCFTA as a legal instrument has not started, the Secretariat last year in October, they launched an interim arrangement called the Guided Trade Initiative, which is a GTI. So the Guided Trade Initiative started with about 8 countries across Africa. I mean, Nigeria wasn't part of that first phase, but then you had Ghana, Kenya, Mauritius, Egypt, Tunisia, I think Tanzania, Cameroon, just countries across from different regions in Africa. And then the idea was, okay, let them start to test the AFCFTA. So let them start to try to trade under the AFCFTA with a very specific limited number of goods. And it's just like piloting it. Yeah, you can think about it as a pilot, just to figure out what may be some of the challenges down the line and how can we start to even try to overcome these challenges. So that has been happening, but then the Secretariat is now looking to expand this GTI. So they want to add some more countries onto the initial 8 countries that were selected. I know Nigeria is trying to make sure that they're part of the next phase of the GTI. I mean, 2 weeks ago, the Nigerian Action Committee for the National Action Committee for implementing the AFCFTA in Nigeria organized a workshop at the NEPC on the GTI. So on trying to onboard producers onto the GTI by showing them how to file for their certificates of origin. So that's one of the major advancements that has been taking place. Some months ago also, there was the AFCFTA Business Forum that happened in Cape Town, where they brought together private sector actors, because even though the AFCFTA is happening at the level of diplomats, so African Union people, heads of state, I mean, you have the heads of state, you also have the Council of Ministers. So these are ministers of trade and industry. You also have the Council of, I think they call them trade experts, just also usually within the public service, or maybe like directors of trade. At the end of the day, these are not the people that are going to trade, and that's just the truth. It's the private firms, right? So it's the private sector guys. Governments can trade with each other, especially when they have state-owned enterprises, or they can also trade with each other using their procurement laws. So for example, perhaps Nigeria with the new government, they want to get new chairs somewhere, and they decide to, get it from another country because of some arrangement, which allows them to use government procurement to drive trade. But normally, typically, it's private actors that trade. So now there's an effort to bring in the private actors even more in these conversations. And I think in Nigeria, a lot of the private sector guys, especially the large ones, are very interested in the AFCFTA, because even though the AFCFTA was designed as a Pan-African agreement where we're saying, Ubuntu, Kumbaya, I mean, not Kumbaya, but Ubuntu, whenever you talk about the AFCFTA and the history of it, they play a recording from Kwame Nkrumah when he said very long ago that we need to create a single African market. So it's been an objective for our founding fathers. But now for private sector actors in Africa, they may not really care about that ideology of Pan-Africanism. For them, it's about business. And for producers in Nigeria, because now we're in Nigeria talking about Nigeria, it's even about survival. All of us in Nigeria know how challenging the economy has been and how consumer demand has been collapsing for many things. So there's an FMCG company, I can't remember which one now, one of those ones that produce household goods, that said that they have a huge stock of goods that they've not been able to sell over the last couple of months. From the currency crisis, just different things. People are not spending as much as they used to in Nigeria because disposable income is going down. And what do you do as a firm? When you find yourself in that position, you need new markets. So it may be difficult for you to relocate your production facilities out of Nigeria, but what you need to do is that even if you're in Nigeria, you need new markets to sell your goods. So producers in Nigeria are now quite interested in the AFCFTA, even for survival, right, to continue their operations. And they can't just export to other markets without the AFCFTA, because if a duty is applied to their goods, so if a tariff is applied to their goods, combining that with the high cost of production in Nigeria due to the cost of generating your own power and things like that, their goods will not be able to compete in these new markets. So AFCFTA, as very key to Nigeria's economic resilience and survival, and also the services side of things, being very key to youth development in Nigeria. As maybe final points, because I'm sure now my time is probably wrapping up. I saw that NITDA, in collaboration with, is it Coursera or one of those online platforms, is trying to train as many young Nigerians as possible with digital skills. So it was a wide range of skills that you can apply, and then they'll give you access to the courses for 6 months. And these are services. I mean, these are skills that would allow young Nigerians to be able to export their services. So when you think about exporting services, sometimes it may sound a little bit confusing, but whenever you're doing something that doesn't involve a physical good, I mean, there's the other side of things where you have manufacturing services, which are the services that allow you to export goods. But beyond that, when you talk about people-based services, right, it's when you export your brain power. So things that you do with your brain, when you do coding, when you do copywriting, when you do research, and you get money into the country because of that brain power that you're using, then you're exporting a service. So it's an effort to equip more young Nigerians with the ability to export their services. And then a lot of discussion about how that can happen under the AFCFTA. And of course, with in the case of this group now, we're talking about also things like entertainment services that are already being exported from Nigeria across Africa, but we're not getting enough value back for it. So how do we make sure that we retain the value from the incredible outputs that our cultural sector is putting out into Africa? So I think that's the overview from me. Thank you. Over to you now, Amina.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was very enlightening. While we were listening to you, the second mentor joined. I'd like to welcome Mr. Leonard. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon, and thank you.
You're welcome, sir. I would like to have an overview from you on the topic, sir.
Okay, I'm really wondering what else I would have to say. I think Tenny has given a good back about the AFCFTA. So maybe I'll just throw in a few words to say that, especially from a beginner's perspective, you look at the AFCFTA as an attempt to eliminate barriers to trade and investment and movement of capital around Africa. So you just ask yourself, well, why is it that you could produce in Lagos and sell in Kano or Maiduguri, but by the time you attempt to move it just across the border, then it becomes a different issue. So it means that trade is not, because every country has sovereignty over its economy, and we want to set its own rules as to what it accepts in terms of import, or what it sells in terms of export. But looking at it really critically, you ask yourself, so why do I need to face some barriers to, assuming I was producing in Badagry, why would I need to face any kind of barrier to sell my goods in Benin Republic, for example, just across the border, which is much closer to you than even selling in mainland Lagos, not to talk of having to travel across the country to move to the south or to the east to sell. Now, why that is difficult is because you're crossing a boundary, and boundaries are not just political, they are also economic. Every country wants to protect its own economic interest and drive its economic agenda in its own way. And that's where trade agreements like the AFCFTA come in. So we ask ourselves as neighbors to say, why can't we eliminate these restrictions, these barriers to trading among ourselves? One of those barriers, of course, is tariff, for what you commonly call customs duty. You're importing from even Cameroon, which is also across the border at the eastern flank. You need to pay more duties for the products, except where there is an agreement that exempts those products from import duties. But import duties are probably the least barriers to trade across borders, because import is usually calculated as a percentage of the value of the good, have reduced in the world, also significantly reduced around Africa, of the goods you bought and ship them across the border.
Okay, I think we lost Mr. Leonard there. While we wait for him to join us, our presenters ready. I think our first presenter is Susie. Okay, Susie. Susie, are you ready to present?
Okay, yes, I am. There's only.
I think he's trying to get back. Let's just give a few seconds. Then, okay.
Okay, so I'll just exit one platform. Yeah. Okay, fine. So let me do it on my phone. So so import tariff has significantly reduced, but you have other kind of barriers. You have the non-tariff barriers. So for example, you have to meet certain regulations, whether dealing and all that. So every country has their own. And the question is, why can't we try to eliminate or harmonize these barriers in such a way that we have of goods and services? That's where the AFCFTA came. So we've tried to do this at the regional levels. You know, Africa has regional economic communities, ECOWAS in West Africa, COMESA in Eastern and Southern Africa, EHC, ECAS, you know. So we've tried to do this, you know, at those levels, but we're saying we then need to move it to a continental level. And the idea of the AFCFTA is that, you know, we can gradually begin to eliminate these barriers, whether they are tariff, non-tariff barriers. We can also begin to gradually harmonize our policies so that with time, we're able to have seamless flow of trading goods and services, what you call soft borders, or even borderless trade, as you have in places like Europe, for example. Now, specific to the issues you're handling today, which is around trading services, fintech, and so that's one of the pillars of the AFCFTA agreement. You have the agreement on, you have the protocol on trading goods, then the protocol on trading services, then the other accompanying protocols on investment, IP, competition, and the two forthcoming ones under negotiation, which is the digital economy and digital trade and women and youth. Now, the whole idea of trading services is that, of course, you know, services are intangible, so they're more difficult to capture. And you also know that sometimes services are consumed as they are produced. So that also makes it more difficult to capture services. So for example, if, well, what I do a lot of consulting on trade, especially across Africa. So I just completed a report this morning for the European Union on a project in Rwanda. And now I sent the report and the European Union pays me. That's service trade, you know, that's professional service trade, and that. Now, what if when I'm delivering a lecture, for example, assuming this was a lecture and people are connected from different parts of the world and they have paid me to deliver this lecture. So the service is consumed as I'm producing it, and then it becomes difficult for you to capture it as trade, except of course there's a report from the meeting to say, oh, we had such a meeting and so number of people connected and they paid X amount of money. Now, in terms of fintech, what fintech does in this entire services landscape is to, well, before I talk about that, let me just give you a primer about how services are traded even across borders. So that's what we call modes of services trade. The first mode is the mode transmission across borders. So I've just given you two examples. If I'm producing the knowledge here and sending it abroad, that's transmission across borders. It doesn't really require any human being moving across the borders to trade. So most of the things you consume on the internet are transmission across borders. You're in your country, consuming services produced by some other person in their country and paying for it. That's across borders. Like when you stream your Netflix movie and all that. Now, the mode 2 is consumption abroad. And that means that you've crossed your own country border into another country and you're consuming services there. So, for example, hotel services, when you pay for hotel services, for maybe transportation services as a tourist or as a business traveler, you're consuming it abroad. The third one is commercial presence or establishment. So it means that a company from one country has moved to another country to establish commercial presence. So you have to go by the regulations of the country and all that. And that's important because when I talk about fintech, I'll connect that. And the fourth mode of services trade is movement of natural persons. So when a professional person moves from one country to the other to offer services, so that's a movement across borders, so what you could call economic migration. So that's also trade in services because you cross borders to offer your services and get paid there. Now, when you look at fintech, all these modes of services can come into play. First, you know that fintech is not just, two key roles, at least two key roles that fintech could play. Number one is as an enabler of trade generally. So you make trade and you make payments, so you need seamless means of making payments across borders. So that's fintech comes in there. Secondly, fintech as a service in itself, as a tradable service in itself. So that means, for example, when what's their name now? One of the fintech companies in Nigeria, Flutterwave, for example, who establishes presence in Ghana, in Uganda, in Kenya, in South Africa, all those places, And they don't just establish commercial presence, but they also move staff sometimes, like Nigerian banks have all over Africa. They also move staff. So in that case, you're establishing commercial presence and you're also moving natural persons into that country. Now, imagine that country has restrictions on the employment of foreigners in their country, or even restrictions on the establishment of foreign companies with foreign origin in their country. Now, that restriction would have to be reduced or eliminated in the context of a trade agreement like the AFCFTA. Now, that's why it's important. I know many countries have, taken steps over the years to liberalize their services sectors for investment and all that, but it could still be a few restrictions here and there, that need to be removed. Let me know when my time is up. Just signal me so that I don't talk endlessly. Yes.
I will do that.
Is my time up?
About 2 minutes remaining.
Pardon me?
2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes more. Yeah. So. Okay. So let me just conclude by saying that what you're considering is an interesting topic, and getting to understand the nitty-gritty of it is important. And only my last comment would be on whether and that's just a response to any whether trade has really started within the AFCFTA. I think it has started because the fact that rules of being completed is not something actually based on the past, even though the protocol on itself has not been finalized. So yes, we are in for interesting times, and it's time for us. Okay, thank you very much. I think that should be a good place to stop.
Thank you so much, sir, for that. Yes, we can hear you, sir. Thank you so much for that. We'll be taking our presentation from Ms. Susie on fintech, AFCFTA and fintech, and the fintech industry. Susie, if you're ready, you can start. Kindly note that you have about 7 to 10 minutes to round up your presentation.
Okay. Okay. Okay, yes. Can you hear me?
We can hear you clearly. We can. We can also see your screen.
Okay. So the topic is AFCFTA and fintech. So basically, let me slide. Okay. So according to the slide, it says African Continental Free Trade Agreement is a trade agreement among 54 African countries, which aims to create a single market for goods and services in Africa. According to what Ms. Teniola said, she said that AFCTA is a form of the AU agenda of 2063 to increase intra-African trade in goods and services. So this is like a kind of agenda or agreement to bring African countries together to create a single market for intra-African trade, for African countries to be able to trade amongst themselves without so much restrictions or barriers. Okay, on to the next, the objectives of AFCFTA. And there are more objectives, but these are just the few that were listed here. One, to lift 30 million Africans out of extreme poverty and increase income of 68 million others. Number two is to boost Africa's income by $450 billion by 2035. And the third one here is to increase Africa's exports by 560 billion, primarily in manufacturing. So these are some of the things that, or the benefits that this agenda, this AU agenda of AFCTA will bring to African countries, in the sense that with AFCTA is definitely a good move towards economic growth of Africa as a continent in general. So on to the next. I see opportunities for the fintech industry. What this means is that opportunity of the fintech in together with the AFCTA, how this AFCFTA can be beneficial to the fintech industry. And the first thing we have is that payment facilitation is crucial for trade within AFCTA. Like Mr. Leonard said, so if this AFCFTA is actually being adopted, or it's now actually, we are now trading with it, the fintech industry is going to be of great benefit, like for seamless payment, because payments will definitely be necessary to be able to aid or facilitate trade between countries. So now it's the work of the fintech industry to ensure that there's seamless trade between different people, business people across the different African countries. The next thing says fintech solutions can establish a payment and settlement platform to eliminate currency convertibility. This to say that the fintech industry in its own way can aid this AFCFTA by trying to eliminate for Africans to be able to convert their currency. There won't be need for convert your this a Ghanaian. I hope I'm making sense. Then the next is the Pan-African Payment and Settlement Scheme. It will facilitate seamless cross-border transaction. Then fintech companies can develop innovative payment gateways and enhance financial inclusion for traders. I think they're all saying the same thing. Then it also says that this fintech enables crowdfunding, lending. So the work of the fintech industry in promoting the AFCFTA also be going to create an for different Africans that decide to trade amongst themselves, like create an avenue for them to be able to borrow and lend money from each other. And it also enhances financial inclusivity accessibility for traders, helping them exit poverty. So in the sense that the fintech is going to create an access for funds through some fintech apps. People have access to funds or to loans, actually, sorry. So this is how the fintech industry can aid it. Then digital lending platforms can provide quick access to capital for small and medium-sized enterprises, also saying the same thing. So financial solutions help streamline supply chain financing for businesses across the continent. And then open banking initiatives can enable data sharing and support credit assessments. The next slide. Now said the next one is personal banking. It says that fintech can drive the transition from unbanked to bank. Says that because of the in the with the aim to promote AFCFTA agreements or trading, a lot of people would there, especially those maybe rural communities, even if they didn't have banks before, but then because of this,
I think she has gone. Something wrong.
to be able to promote
We'll still be
trade
communicating on WhatsApp. Yeah.
from
Is there anything that any issues? Yeah, but if they tell about that, when I think what has to be like address of certain level. You think yeah, just like that your it's doctor you are doing now. Your
okay. Thank you. Can I go on?
Yes, please.
Okay. The next is provides opportunities to build credit and accumulate wealth. That's to say the fintech industry is building a platform or an avenue for people to be able to get funds and also increase their finance through the through the loans that they'll be able to get to also invest it back into their businesses. Then mobile banking apps can offer convenient and affordable banking services to undeserved communities. That's what the fintech industry, how it can help the AFCTA agreements. Then AI or robo advisors can assist individuals in making informed financial decisions. Then fintech solutions can empower individuals to save, invest, and access financial products easily. All these are some of the benefits of the fintech industry today. AFCFCTA. And another thing is that, okay, for the benefit of the fintech industry from the AFCFTA agreements, the AFCFTA will open a larger market for fintech companies. This is to say that fintech industries, both in Nigeria and also in other countries, they now have access or a larger market in the sense that there will be more transactions, many people making transactions not only within Nigeria but also within other African countries, and on the other part of the fintech industries are making a whole lot of profit because of the increase in transactions. And then next, they said increased adoption of fintech apps for trading within the continent. So if this AFCFTA idea is into its trade form is actually is adopted, there'll be many people resolve or go into using fintech apps a lot, as this will really make making payments to different countries very easy for everybody. So that's still under the fintech industry will have access to larger markets. Then fintech startups can scale their operations and reach a broader customer base. It's all saying the same thing. Now, the fintech industry, their trading no longer be within their countries, but also extend to other African countries. That's creating a great opportunity for upskilling or increasing their business profits. Then the next is expansion opportunities beyond domestic markets, leading to growth and increased revenue. I think all of them, all the points are still hitting on the same thing. That's access to larger markets. Then on to the next, it says fostering innovation and talent. The first thing is that collaboration among fintech entrepreneurs from different member states. So when this AFCFTA is in place, it will foster the coming together or partnering of different fintech industries, not only in the same country, but also with other fintech industries in other countries, in the sense that there's no more like the regulatory agreement between the countries will be in uniform, because now if there won't be any regulatory barrier between these countries because of the AFCFTA. So different fintech industries in different countries will have the opportunity to partner with themselves. And also, like Mr. Leonard said, he said that they can also offer fintech as a tradable service. So this AFCTA will help in a way that fintech industries, they can also like send some of their, what will I call it, their workers to other industries abroad for whatsoever, to other African countries for whatsoever business agreements or idea or contracts they want to go into, without any restriction or barrier based on their regulations or different regulations that serve as a hindrance. All these barriers will no longer be in place. That's what he's trying to say. Then opportunities for knowledge exchange and skills transfer among fintech professionals. That's all. That's still under fostering innovation and talent. So they'll be able to partner and exchange skills and knowledge. And on all these aims towards increasing the economic growth of African countries. Then also the next, it says the challenges and considerations. Then first thing is regulatory harmonization. So ensuring consistent fintech regulations across member states to facilitate cross-border operations. So these are some of the things I've taken into consideration in the AFCFTA. There won't be regulation. The regulations in place will now help to facilitate or aid cross-border operations, mean that different fintech industries can partner or collaborate together without any difference in their regulatory forms or agreements that will serve as a hindrance. Then establishing regulatory frameworks that balance innovation with consumer protection. Then collaboration among regulators to address legal and compliance. And the next is encouraging standardization of fintech practices to promote interoperability. Then the infrastructure developments. The first one is expanding fintech, internet connectivity, and digital infrastructure to support fintech growth. Investing in this is how the AFCFTA can aid the fintech industry. That's also investing in cybersecurity measures to protect financial transactions and customer data. Then collaborating with governments and private sector stakeholders to improve digital infrastructure. And the last is addressing the digital divide and promoting inclusivity in addressing fintech services. Thank you very much. That'll be all.
Thank you so much, Susie. The next presenter is going to be Amara. I don't know if she's on the call. Yes, she's here. Amara, are you ready to give us your presentation? Hello.
Hello, good evening. I'm not the one to take the presentation, but I'm trying to get the person.
Okay, kindly do that. Thank you so much. I want us to use this opportunity to take pictures for our social media pages. Our mentors and mentees, kindly turn on your cameras. Thank you so much. Hussein, are you online to take the screenshot? Oh, he's not here. Okay, I will do that. Okay, he's here. Hussein?
Yes. Are we on the picture time?
Yes, please.
All right. Okay, please, you can smile for the camera, please. You can't see our faces, so are we not turning on our videos? Please, you are all encouraged to turn on your video while I'm taking the script. Thank you very much.
Oops, he has gone offline again, sorry. But I think he's done with the pictures, so we can continue. Thank you so much. Amara, are you ready? Okay, is the presenter ready?
Yes, he is. He's online now.
Okay, he can go ahead. The topic is IP and African trade, right? Is he here? We don't have much time. Hello? Okay, I think we can just skip to taking our mentor's comments on the first presentation while he gets ready. Ms. Teniola, can you start? We want a review on the first presentation, please.
Sure. Yeah, I really enjoyed the presentation. I thought you covered a lot of the important issues when it comes to financial services. So I don't work in the fintech space, but even listening to you, I was hearing some, possibilities of what can happen. With fintech in Nigeria and in Africa, I know that some of our big players are already operating in the African markets. A bunch of the big names, Flutterwave and Co, have operations maybe in East Africa, in Ghana, and they've been trying to break into even the wider African markets beyond those countries. So it's an interesting question, like you're asking, that in what ways AFCFTA even fast track that expansion that is already happening, and there is this initiative under the AFCFTA, I think you mentioned it, it's called the Pan-African Payments and Settlement Scheme, the PAPSS or the PAPS, and it's been designed to help African countries trade in their own currency. So it's a financial service, if you put it that way, that is being implemented by the African, the AFREXIM, African Export-Import Bank, just to make sure that we're not losing value by converting our currencies to the dollar before we trade. So it would be good to also, to look into that, to see, how many feeder services can probably come into that. And also talking about fintech, fintech generally is referring to payments. And like you said, it's about paying for these goods, paying for these services, and just everything that happens there. So I'd say in all, I really enjoyed the presentation. I actually learned a lot. I thought that you covered very interesting areas. I would encourage you to even write this up as perhaps an article, like a policy article that you can publish out there, just to contribute to the knowledge production on the AFCFTA and the potential it holds for the financial services sector in Africa. So I think I'll hand over to Leonard now, who should be able to say more very specifically on the subject matter.
Thank you, Ma.
Yeah, well, thank you, Tenny. Unfortunately, I got a bit distracted while listening to the presentations, but I've had the opportunity of reading the presentations ahead of time. So the whole discussion about fintech, and I think I already jumped the gun because I already talked about it. So I'm just thinking of what to add now. But what I'll just say, if there are specific questions, excuse me, that you have for me, I'm happy to answer. Just to reiterate the points I saw from your presentations about the important role that fintech can play in accelerating trade in Africa. Like Tony said, you mentioned the PAPS, which is a great mechanism established by AFREXIM Bank to enable seamless payment. Perhaps I should say this, and that's how. This just shows you an example of how technology goes ahead of regulation. How regulation lags behind technology. In 2013, there was a process to introduce a regional clearing system for West Africa. That's a mouthful, but what it simply means is that it's a system where you can use a card issued in Ghana, for example, a city card in Ghana to make issued in Ghana to make transaction in Nigeria, and you get and it goes, as we say, without recourse to the whole dollar, MasterCard, Visa card thing, so it's like country to country without recourse. So it's like a regional clearing system where you can have seamless trade. Now, this was as far back as 2013. I remember being in one of such meetings in Dakar, and the BCRO, that's like the central bank of the French West African countries, demonstrated the use of that system in that meeting, But look at how many years it has taken us. We don't yet have that in ECOWAS, but it's a good thing that the Afrexim Bank has been able to do that. And I want to give another example. So I was trying to send $150 to the Gambia. Excuse me, to the Gambia, just across the within West Africa here. And by the time I went to the bank and calculated the charges, it didn't make sense to me. I think the charges came up to $90-something or so, So it didn't make much sense to me. And someone introduced me to Flutterwave's, is this Send, they call it. So I went, and the transaction was seamless for me to be able to send from my, like to send from my Naira account, I could also send from my dollar account. So to send the money to the Gambia, although it had problems, somewhere along the line and all that. But for me, the idea that I could do that at very little cost, minimal cost, was very impressive. So the technology is there. The technology is available to drive trade, drive payments across the region, But where you need an agreement like AFCFCTA, that to smoothen the regulatory plane, to remove the restrictions. I saw the concept of open banking in one of the presentations, which I think is brilliant. You mentioned it. It's something that our central bank has even embraced, that would also make it easier for fintechs to move from one country to the other. So if a company in Nigeria, a fintech company in Nigeria, for example, is moving to Uganda, they wouldn't have to worry themselves about having to start afresh to get customers, to begin to profile their customers, and all that. But what could drive their penetration into the market is basically by having customers transfer data to them. So if you want to sign up with them, you could simply authorize them to obtain your transaction history and your data from your own bank, So that's also another game changer for payments transaction in Africa. Mind you, that financial payments or financial services generally is highly regulated, and for good reason, But our aim, and what the AFCFTA should aim at, is reducing those barriers as much as possible, harmonizing regulations across the borders as much as possible, so that we can have seamless trade. So on that note, I'm happy to answer specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Our second presenter is ready. You can start now. Is he having network issues?
I think he's having network issues, but let me get back to him.
It's Suleiman, right?
Yes, his name is Suleiman. Suleiman.
Yes, okay. I'm so sorry, everyone. I was just informed by Mr. Hussein that he couldn't take the screenshot. So if you can just use this time to take another one.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Okay. Thank you for joining us, Suleiman. We can hear you. Carry on, please.
Good evening.
Good
Can you hear me?
evening. Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah. Solutions of AFCFCTA in the growth of the creative industry and service trade. And
You have
service
10
trade.
minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
If I go off, the meaning of AFC, the African
I'm not sure we can hear
continental
you.
trade,
I don't know if it's
free
from
trade
my
area.
end. Okay.
So I'll be moving to the introduction.
I don't know. Can someone else step up the presentation or while he shares the screen? Because I don't think we can hear him. I can't hear him.
All right, I'll take up the presentation, ma.
Okay, thank you very much. Can
All
we
right.
let him inform him? Because I think it's
most of Africa
Mr. Suleiman?
which covers all of Africa. It was established the minimum.
Okay, you can. I think he has left the. You can step up now, please. We don't have much time.
Please hold on. Let me share the screen.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Is my screen being shared currently?
Not yet. I can't see anything yet.
Okay, please. I'm having some sort of issues sharing
Okay,
my screen.
yes, we can see your screen now.
Can see it now. All right, thank you very much. Well, basically, for our group presentation this week, we have the possible challenges and solutions for AFCFT in the growth of the creative industry and service trade. This is a presentation for our group 2, intellectual property. Well, basically, we're trying to showcase or expose the possible challenges that can actually be faced by the AFCFT in the creative industry, which is usually associated with IP. So a brief introduction is telling us about the AFCFT, which basically means African Continental Free Trade Area. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So this is a trade area that encompasses most of Africa and was established in 2018. Basically, this project was embarked on by African countries, by a meeting of African countries, in order to enhance free trade amongst all African countries, to improve economic development and economic growth in these countries, to help to remove some barriers to trade, such as tariffs, and help African countries basically to be progressive. So I'll be moving on to the challenges faced by the creative industry in view of the AFCFT. Basically, in Nigeria, we are aware of most of the challenges the creative industry faces. And in light of this project, which is the AFCFT, there are lots of challenges which we have in Nigeria. Number one is differences in legal framework. Now, the legal frameworks of all of these African countries coming together are quite very, very, very different. There are different laws for the creative industry or intellectual property in Nigeria, different from the one in Kenya, different from the ones in other countries. So when we're trying to make all of these legal frameworks cohesive, it brings about quite a challenge. Secondly, adequate infrastructure. Basically, most of the African countries, if you are being realistic, are not up to par when it comes to development, right? So some of these African countries lack the adequate infrastructure to make this a success. There is lack of skilled workforce with expertise like creative art. Nigeria and some African countries are not areas that actually help to promote creative art. In fact, it is not actually the best ground to actually be creative artists. It doesn't, some of these countries do not actually let us grow in areas of creativity. Thus, the workforce is limited. Even the available ones would rather go abroad than to harness it in these African nations. There is lack of capacity buildings and weak institutions. And then externally, there is a fear around the possibility of an influx of talent and competition from other parts of the continent to the country. Well, we prefer solutions to these challenges. One of the challenges is collaboration. Basically, one of the solutions is collaboration. Basically, this solution is just preferring that these countries that are bringing forth this project have to be cooperative and collaborate, because anything that can be any good which can be brought about by these arrangements can only happen when when these countries cooperate. Second one is Nigeria should practice updating and modernizing its regulatory framework. Okay, as we are all aware, even intellectual property, they aren't really, apart from the Copyright Act and I think the Industrial Design Act, there aren't really specific, strong legal frameworks guiding intellectual property in Nigeria. We are not updating and modernizing our framework, especially the legal framework. So Nigeria on its part should try to modernize and update its regulatory framework. Government should invest in infrastructure such as internet connectivity, constant power supply, which are things we can all relate to. Lack of power supply, bad network, high rates of things. Nigeria can do better. Strengthening of educational and vocational training programs that will help develop a skilled workforce capable of meeting the evolving trade demand. This is actually quite related. This is actually quite important. We all Nigerians know how deplorable the state of the educational sector is. Nigeria has to do better. Africa has to do better to strengthen the educational and vocational training programs in order to ensure that this is a success. Now to the main topic, how intellectual property rights interact with IP protocol under the AFCFTA. We can see about 5 points here. Okay, the interaction between IP and IP protocol in the African AFCFTA can be complex, but there are some considerations regarding the interaction. And these are, each member country of AFCFTA has its own IP law that protects IP rights. These laws determine the scope and enforcement mechanism of IP. The IP protocol under AFCFTA does not supersede the national IP law. Okay, this is simply trying to tell us that all of the countries under this project, under the AFCFTA, have their own IP laws relatable to those trade areas. So the IP protocol under the AFCFTA supersedes all other IP laws. So let's say there's copyright law in Nigeria, Copyright Act in Nigeria. The IP protocol or the IP law at the AFCFTA supersedes all other laws when it concerns free trade area in relation to all countries in this agreement. The IP protocol may include mechanism for resolving IP disputes. So basically, the IP protocol for the AFCFTA should also include processes of resolving disputes amongst member countries in order to prevent the falling apart of this IP protocols recognize the need for flexibility and safeguards IP rights. Like we know, this is simply one of the major characteristics of IP rights. It helps to safeguard IP rights. The IP protocol under AFCFTA seeks to promote harmonization and convergence. Basically, these relationships here are things that we can all relate to, things that we can easily think of, and things that we can easily understand. The IP protocol serves to promote harmonization. It is the end goal of the AFCFTA. It is the end goal of the relationship between the IP protocol and the AFCFTA. In conclusion, hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You went off a bit, but we can hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. In conclusion, national IP law will continue to play a crucial role in determining the scope and enforcement of IP rights within each country's jurisdiction. Like we said before, the IP protocol at the AFCFTA level supersedes the IP laws relating to all other countries. So basically, national IP law and enforcement of IP rights in each country. So interaction of IP laws and protocols under AFCFTA is expected to facilitate greater cooperation. This is totally a roundup of everything we're seeing. AFCFTA came to foster cooperation, convergence, harmony, and all between amongst African countries. This interaction of IP laws in the long run seeks to further harmonize and achieve these goals. So thanks for listening to me and being an attentive audience. I'm done with my presentation.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mary Jane.
All right, you're very welcome.
You know, wonderful job. Okay, I'll just let the mentors comment on the presentation. Mr. Leonard, if you're online.
I'm here, but perhaps Leonard should go first this time around.
Okay, that's fair. So thank you for that presentation, and you know, you mentioned about the creative industry and the IP linkage. So if you take this back to the framework,
Jane, can you stop sharing your screen? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So if you take this back to the framework I discussed in terms of the modes of services trade, when you're looking at creative industry, so imagine you here watching a movie that is produced somewhere else, maybe produced in Uganda or in Kenya or even in the US, and you're streaming from Netflix or HBO, or you're streaming from, you know, whatever service. You know, that's trading service happening. You're watching a creative service produced in another country, and you're actually accessing it from your own country. So that's cross-border transmission that is happening there. Now, whether it is cross-border transmission or even where you travel to other countries to pay money, for example, to watch a soccer match, or to pay money to watch a performance, you know, then that's consumption abroad. You can also have some of these companies establishing commercial presence in another country, you know, that's the mode 3. And then another important one, or rather the one I consider the most problematic one because of extant regulations around Africa, is when you have, okay, have you ever wondered what it takes the DSTV, for example, to produce a movie in Nigeria, especially when they are going to use foreign crew, use foreign actors? So what do you take them to take Nigerians to do? What's that? The Big Brother show, for example, if you want to go to South Africa, you know, it's not just about setting up your stage and props and then, you know, begin to film. There are quite a number of issues that are involved. So, for example, if you're going to use foreign crew, do those foreign crew have the right to work in the location where you're shooting? Do they have the right to the permit to work there? So you may need to get them temporary permits for them to be able to work in the location where you're shooting. That's an issue in trading services, and that goes to mode 4. which is the movement of natural persons. If you are importing equipment, because that will be temporary importation, of the equipment you're going to use, you have to declare, you may even have to pay some duties, or make a bond, which will be refunded to you at the time when you're taking away your equipment, And some countries have rules that say for you to air any commercial or any, especially commercials, TV commercials in our country, and I think Nigeria has that kind of rule, that there's a local content requirement, within that commercial. So maybe the local content requirement could be at least 50%, 60%, and the idea behind this is just so that you don't, maybe if, say Nestle, which is a multinational operating in Nigeria and several other countries, wants to produce a commercial, Nigeria wouldn't want them to go produce it in Ghana, for example, and then come show it on our TV. We want to get some value, for our creative industry from that production. So we could place some restrictions and all that, So these are some how regulations impact trade in services. And what an agreement like the AFCFTA, for example, would then try to do, is try to streamline these regulations, try to reduce them as much as possible, and just come to a place of where it makes more business sense for this kind of services to flow across border. Now, and the other important issue that you also talked about is intellectual property rights. So whether you're consuming abroad or whether you're transmitting across borders, IP rights are national, country specific, so they are nationally determined. That means your product would have to comply with the IP laws of the country where you're sending or you're selling your products to. I'll give you a rather banal example, really. Using regulations on public morality, for example. Now you realize that some productions that could be sold in the market in say in the Western world, for example, may be censored in Nigeria or banned in Nigeria because it could be seen as offending public morality. So that affects your ability to sell that production in that country. Or what if when they are deemed to affect the copyright, for example, of another producer in Nigeria? So, so that means you may want to import a creative work from South Africa, but coming to Nigeria, you realize that it affects the copyright of another person in Nigeria. So the person goes to court in Nigeria, and first gets an injunction to restrain you, from airing that to the Nigerian market and all that. So these issues will keep interfacing, but what again, I come back to the importance of an agreement like the AFCFTA is just try to understand these issues and have a constructive approach to solving them. And I'm saying that very advisedly because there's always this danger of people thinking that a free trade agreement like the AFCFTA is about removing all restrictions. It can't be. Really, in the real world, that's not possible. You can't eliminate all restrictions. You need to find solutions that are win-win solutions that are acceptable to the person who wants to protect their market and also acceptable to the person who wants to receive the goods, who wants to sell the goods into that market. And you also talked about capacity building, and I think at the heart of trading services is the issue of capacity building, because then you're looking at trading of skills, trading of professional skills of different kinds. So any country that wants to succeed in the trade environment, especially wants to build on trading services, we then have to have a deliberate program of training, in terms of digital skills, in terms of creative skills, in terms of, for example, in the creative industry, from script writing, songwriting, production management, directing, costume. People are flown abroad from Nigeria just to provide, or what do you call them, the makeup artists, on production sets. People traveling around the world doing that, so it's a skill, and the person who goes around the world doing that is trading in services, basically, so this, or maybe even the fashion industry, and all that. So any country that wants to succeed would have to pay a lot of attention to developing the skills. Now, the skills development is one layer. There's a second layer to it. The second layer to it is about certification, especially where those are professional services requiring a level of competence. And again, mostly certification is nationally determined also. So that means every country has its criteria for qualification, certification, for you to be able to render particular services. So I'll use the legal service, for example, which I think many of you belong to. So for you to practice law in Nigeria, you don't have to be a Nigerian. Some countries make it that you have to be a national of their country, but in Nigeria, you don't have to be a Nigerian. But no matter the qualification you've obtained, maybe you're a professor of law, for example, in Kenya, you then have to enroll into the Nigerian law school. You go through Bar Part 1 because you're a foreign trained lawyer. Then after Bar Part 1, you then go to Bar Part 2, and then when you pass Bar Part 2, then you're qualified to practice in Nigeria. And that applies to several other professions, So if we are able to, for example, drive initiatives around mutual recognition, and what that means is that one country would be able to recognize the qualification issued by the other country as being equivalent, to its own qualifications. So they certify you or give you a fast track process to being certified to practice in that country. So, for example, those are the kind of things we're looking at the AFCFTA will be able to do, because the protocol on trading services actually encourages countries to negotiate mutual recognition agreements in terms of services, and to allow other countries to accede to those kind of agreements. So, if you're planning, for example, to practice law in other African countries, you then have to look at the qualifications. If you're planning to, maybe you want to set up a music production outfit in those countries, you have to look at whether they require you as the proprietor to have any particular kind of certification to be able to operate in those countries. So I've talked about the modes you can use to trade in the creative or entertainment industry. I've talked about the importance of capacity, that's education, training, and then the other layer, which is knowing what the regulations are in terms of certification, and how the AFCFTA could actually help to reduce the regulatory burden around qualifications and certification. So I'll hand over to Tenny.
Thank you, Leonard. Yeah, all right. Thank you, Leonard. You've covered a lot of it already. I guess what I would want to add also for us to look at, which I think was mentioned during the presentation, is the platforms, right? So the platforms that are being used to trade these services, and what it means, when we think about who owns the platforms and where the ownership of the platforms are located. So as one example, I think I was watching something today. I saw a video by Rema, and then I said, well, let me listen to some of Rema's songs. And then I went to Spotify. So there is, me streaming the song, me streaming Rema's song, ideally, yes, it will bring some revenue to him. But the fact that the platform was Spotify, so which is a service, so Spotify is providing that service to me, more or less, means that in some ways I'm almost importing streaming services from wherever Spotify is located, which is, I don't know where they're located, maybe in the US. You even have other examples like what was an indigenous African streaming platform under the creative sector, which was Iroko TV. I don't know where they are located now as a platform, but I think there was a time when they were going to move away from wherever it was that the business was registered originally to somewhere else. And that has implications for trading services, because when you now want to record that trade, even though the property, the content, some royalties and things will go to the originators wherever they are, but then the location of the platform means that there is some value there that is being extracted. So even as we talk about the AFCFTA and we talk about, you know, trading services, trading cultural services, we should also be thinking about these platforms. Do we need, I mean, some people might say no, but then do we need some more African-based platforms to make sure that we're retaining more of that value and to even further concentrate the trade in services within Africa? For the presentation specifically, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was a good one. I mean, looking at intellectual property and the nexus between that and the AFCFTA and entertainment services. I always tell the story. I don't know if I told it the last session about how whenever I would travel outside of Nigeria within Africa, I remember one time I was in Senegal. I went to the museum there, and some Cameroonian guy walked up to me, and when I told him I was Nigerian, he said, "Oh, I've seen your movies." And that's one thing that I used to hear a lot from Africans within Africa. In Ghana, they even used to claim that it was from Nigerian movies that people learned how to carry out robberies on bikes. So Nigerian movies were influencing them negatively, I mean, as a joke. But Nigerian movies have been exported across Africa for a long time now. In fact, other African countries have actually even followed the evolution of our very own Nollywood from when it was more of the old Nollywood, and even now that it has evolved a little bit. But historically, we weren't receiving sufficient value for that export under the entertainment industry because a lot of it was pirated, and not even because of the fault of the other African countries. It was also pirated in Nigeria. At that time, if you remember, I don't know how old or young people on here are, but then how much, like if you were watching a movie back then in Nigeria, it was most likely that that movie was pirated because it was the CDs that used to go everywhere. So now with the AFCFTA, I mean, asking the question, like you were saying, with intellectual property, how do you really conserve the value of these cultural products and make sure that movie producers, actors and actresses, musicians, everybody else in the cultural space. Now we have poets, we have dancers, we have, like, you know, it's a wide range of authors or writers. How do we make sure that they're able to make a living from these cultural exports using a tool like the AFCFTA? Actually, 2 years ago, because there's a literary festival I used to help run, and 2 years ago, we had a panel called The Creatives and the AFCFTA. So before the end of this webinar, I'll put a link in the chat to that panel for people that want to listen to it or to watch it. We had the head of the AFCFTA secretariat at the time as part of the panel, and we had someone from the NOTN really asking the question of how can the AFCFTA help strengthen the creative industry in Nigeria. So thank you for the presentation. Again, Leonard has covered a lot of it. I think I'll hand over to Amina at this point.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We'll be taking our questions and answers. I will be pasting them in the chat box. I'll do that now. Okay. Okay, I've done that. Let's take the first question. The first question is, how much of an impact is the fintech industry to the success of AFCFTA in African countries? I would like to direct that question to Mr. Leonard.
Okay, thank you. I think we've covered most of it. So at the core of the benefit or the impact of fintech is in ensuring seamless payments across borders in Africa, and to the extent that we are able to move away from the traditional and rather clumsy payment system under the traditional banking. I think the fintech will be a game changer. Like I said, I have a lot of hopes, about PAPS, and expecting it to be a real game changer especially because it eliminates the need for us to trade using the dollar. So you could buy, and PAPS has also already been demonstrated between Nigeria and Ghana. So you could buy, go online, browse, see something in Ghana, hosted by a vendor. You know, you buy it, pay in Naira here in Nigeria, in your bank, and then the person gets value in cedi in Ghana from their own bank. So I think that's eliminating the need to use foreign currencies or to use winding, clearing methods and corresponding banks, you know, to make payments. Would be a real game changer for trade in Africa. So yeah, in terms of payments, the fintech is critical.
Thank you so much, sir. I forgot to read out the first question. There was a question before now. I think the system locked me out. But if you have live questions, you can ask our mentors. This is the opportunity for that. You can raise your hands and then I'll call you out.
And if I can just add to what Leonard has said, fintech really helps with payments, which is under trade facilitation. And the other ways that fintech helps in trade facilitation. So aside payments for exchanging goods and services, there's also those payments for even trading. So some of the documents that sometimes you have to get from your customs, some licenses that you have to apply for. Some of the trade facilitation treaties have been telling countries that make these payments digital as well, just to reduce the time that is needed for those transactions to happen. So financial services, but generally just digital trade, which is now a big topic in the global trading system.
Thank you so much. You both have done justice to that question. We don't seem to have any live questions. You can raise your hands if there are any questions, and I'll call you. So while we wait for that, we'll continue reading the questions we already have. I will be reading out question number 5, and I'll be directing it to Mr. Niola. Discuss how Nigeria's IP law might interact with the IP protocol under the AFCFTA.
Yeah, thank you. That is precisely the question that you should have directed to Leonard, because Leonard is the IP lawyer.
Well, I'm not an IP lawyer. I'm just a trade lawyer.
Trade lawyer. So in law, I'm a policy person. But maybe an overview before I hand over to him to explain further. Like someone mentioned earlier, Nigeria's law takes precedence over the AFCFTA. But what it does generally when it comes to continental things is that it provides a framework and sometimes a guide, especially for countries that have gaps within their own local laws. So it can help you strengthen your local law. And it just makes sure that, when we're now dealing with each other, there's a point of reference, right? So there's just an overarching framework or regulatory framework that we can refer to. But let Leonard take this one.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so I'll just add that what the AFCFTA, how it will interact with the IP law in Nigeria. Number one, the protocol requires a minimum level of protection for intellectual property across the state parties. So that means every state party will have to look at their IP laws to see whether those minimum level of protection are met. Otherwise, they will have to update their law. I want to believe that the recently enacted Copyright Act in Nigeria took into consideration the principles and the provisions contained in the AFCFTA, because then you're required, like I said, to meet minimum levels of protection. Now, maybe I could let me say something more about this minimum level of protection. So, and that's borrowing from what Tenny said about, when you go to African countries and the Nigerian movies and many of them being pirated. Now, a framework like the AFCFTA makes it compulsory for country B to protect intellectual property of creatives from country A because they are in an agreement. I know preceding conventions and treaties on intellectual property have something to say about this, but within the context of AFCFTA, it becomes easier for the Nigerian government, for example, to compel the government of, say, Togo, for example, if there is a widespread violation of intellectual property rights of Nigerian productions in Togo, Nigeria can issue a notice to the government requesting for consultation, asking them to do something about it, to apply their laws, to provide the minimum protection for those materials. And where the government of Togo, for example, fails to do that, then the government of Nigeria can proceed to dispute settlement, to compel the government of Togo to be able to act to protect the intellectual property rights of Nigerians that are violated in Togo. Yeah. So now you can reverse that, to say if it was Nigeria, if the violation was taking place in Nigeria, really. So in this case, you have to. The other country will say, oh, you have to apply your IP law. So your IP law serves as an instrument of implementation of your obligation. And that's why the AFCFTA protocol requires that your IP law should be at a certain minimum standard. So those are some of the ways the IP law can interact with the AFCF protocol. The AFCFTA protocol, unfortunately, like I said in our last session, the last session before yours, has not created any continental IP administration framework. It has basically acknowledged what is their set aspirational principles and minimum standards. It will not be out of place for the protocol to, for example, have created maybe an African IP office where you can do registration, which is then recognized all over Africa without having to go through the route of other conventions and, and other. And, we have two of such regional systems in Africa, the OIP and that was the other one now, and some of us thought that the protocol on intellectual property was going to harmonize this and probably have a one system of continental IP protection in Africa, but that didn't happen. So it still remains member countries having to apply their IP laws, and ensure that their IP laws are consistent with the minimum requirements set by the AFCFTA.
Thank you so much, sir. I don't know how I'm going to handle the rest of the questions. I think I'll read them out, and then Mr. Leonard gives us his view, and then Mr. Ni adds to it. Is that okay?
If I can propose a reverse in the order, because I may have to jump off soon, so I can give my view, and then yes, Leonard can come in. If that's okay with you, Leonard.
Well, that's fine. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much.
So I find question 4 particularly interesting. Sorry, am I jumping the gun? You're trying to read the questions out, is it?
No, it's okay. It's okay. Let's do it like that. Your way.
Okay. I'm looking at the.
Did I read it out, or because
I think it.
I'm so sorry, my network is a bit slow, so you can go ahead, ma.
Yeah, I'm sure my network is also causing issues. But yes, so I can see question 4 asking about Nigeria's export issues and the growth in the creative industries. So the fact that Nigeria is more competitive in services trade, remote workers, Nollywood, musicians, but the regulations have not gotten to that yet. I think I'd say that the regulations are slowly trying to catch up with what is happening in the Nigerian economic space. So for a long time, our major exports and just, the main thing about the Nigerian economy was crude oil. But for a while now, that has been changing and declining. So the non-oil sector has been taking up more space, has been growing in prominence. And the non-oil sector is related, partly to things like the services sector. So now there's more attention being paid to the services sector. In fact, just was it a month ago, there was a new project that was launched in Abuja called the IDICE program. They launched it in State House. It's a collaboration with the Nigerian government, with the AFDB, with the French government, and a couple of other agencies. And then they're putting, I think, up to $100 million or something like that, I can't remember, towards the IDICE is the Digital Innovation and Creative Economies. So you can imagine that if they're going to be pumping this amount of money, and this is not money that anybody is dashing Nigeria, this monies are coming in the form of loans, so it's new debt. There's going to be also some initiative or to better regulate the space. So I think what we should be looking at here with this question and with the person that asked it is, what are some of your ideas on how the Nigerian government should go about regulating these spaces so that we make sure that people that don't understand the space are now designing policies that end up hurting rather than harming the space? One thing about, the digital space in Nigeria when it comes to movies, music, is people have always said, and even with the tech industry, that these spaces began to thrive without government support, right? And without government support and despite some actions by the governments that could have harmed the industries. So for the person that asked that question, I think I'd like you to do some thinking, how do you think the government should go about regulating this space? Those in the tech industry are trying very hard to make sure that they influence policies in their space. They came together to drive the Startup Act that was passed a while ago. So with the other side of things, with the creative industries, I think it's also the onus falls back on you. And then for the other questions 2 and 3, I think for questions 2, we had addressed it earlier, that, Nigerian fintechs are already in some ways operating outside of the country. I remember talking to someone that used to be the head of the West African, it was one of the West African banking, maybe the West African Monetary Institute, WAMI or WAMA. There's a West African Monetary Institute, there's a West African Monetary Agency. And the lady then, it was a Nigerian lady, she told me that one of the achievements was that they had facilitated the entry of Nigerian banks into West Africa, which is true. You go to Ghana, you see First Bank, you see GT, you see Access Bank, you see UBA, and many other countries, you see some of these banks. So already we're playing in this fintech space. And the question is, can the AFCFTA even accelerate this as far as possible? Don't forget that local dynamics in different countries vary. Right, so West Africa is more familiar, but by the time you get to East Africa, where they use a lot of M-Pesa and mobile money, we just really want to understand. You go to Southern Africa or South Africa, where the financial services space is highly regulated. South Africa really controls the movement of money in their own economy. So how can the AFCFTA even accelerate the participation of Nigerian fintechs in other countries? Then on the third one, or the last one, how has the AFCFTA aided the growth and success of the fintech industry in Nigeria? The AFCFTA was, the commencement was announced January 2021. I know Leonard is saying that yes, trading under the AFCFTA has started. The people at Tralac will disagree with you because they're the ones that are insisting that, the AFCFTA has not started, that, it's an interim arrangement. And I know some other people, David Luke, for example, would also disagree. He also believes that the AFCFTA has not started. But again, it depends on who you're talking to. But yeah, in light of that, you cannot really say that the AFCFTA has impacted the fintech industry in Nigeria at this time, because Nigeria is not even participating in the AFCFTA yet, right? It's not even part of the guided trade initiative, which started last year. So it's everything that's been happening has been happening organically, but then of course everyone is setting their eyes on the AFCFTA and how it can, like I said, accelerate the growth there. I'll hand it over to you now, Leonard.
Thank you so much, Ma.
Okay. Thank you, Tenny, for the comment on whether the AFCFTA has started or not. I think we just I'll pass, because in my view it has started. Maybe if there's any other reason why, if the argument is just based on the rules of origin, then I don't think it's a strong argument. Yeah. So it's just saying maybe trading services for the because at some point some of the schedules were ready and others were not ready. Even for the trading goods, not all the state parties have submitted their goods schedule at the moment. But those who have submitted theirs, what stops them from trading under the AFCFTA? You know, that's my personal view. Okay, so on the issue of maybe I'll just talk little about that question for, because I believe everything has been covered really. Yeah, Nigeria has competitive advantage in trading services, you know, and I will approach it this way. So for me, from a policy perspective, I think Nigeria should press more towards taking advantage of that competitive advantage we have in trading services. So, for example, by pushing other countries, okay, maybe I should also explain this, that within the AFCFTA, within the framework that is set, there's still room for state parties to engage in bilateral negotiations, or what you could call plurilateral negotiations. That means a few countries can come together and decide to further eliminate barriers among themselves, you know, further reduce restrictions among themselves. I give you the example of mutual recognition. Mutual recognition is not mandated by the protocol in trade or trading services, but it is encouraged that countries should explore mutual recognition. So I think what Nigeria should do is to explore in those areas where we have competitive advantages, to explore and try to deepen negotiations that could grant Nigerians and Nigerian businesses more market access into the other member states of the AFCFTA. We've gone ahead in the banking industry, in the creative industry, but now, you know, we need to examine how the intellectual property laws in those other countries really protect Nigerian creative works in those countries. If where we think we're not having a good deal, we need to understand why. And that's where I think the academics, the experts, and then most importantly, the industry practitioners should be able to come together, analyze, and point out where they think they are losing value, you know, across the continent as a result of maybe weak regulation or strategic non-enforcement of regulation. You know, so where they find that, then they should be able to make a case for the Nigerian government to use the instrument of the AFCFTA to correct that. Otherwise, you know, you would just say we have competitive advantage here, and then, you know, nothing really gets to come out of it at the end of the day. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Ms. Tenny has dropped something on the chat box. Mentees should kindly check. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of today's session. And today's session is the last session. Tomorrow's session is going to be the closing ceremony, and I hope to see everybody there. Thank you so much for our mentors. Mr. Hussein said he couldn't take any screenshots earlier, so I think we'll have to turn on our cameras again. I'm so sorry for that. All our mentees should turn on their cameras. Please turn on your video. Thank you so much. Thank you. Please wear a big smile for the camera. Okay, I'm taking the screenshots now. Okay, there are others that haven't turned on their videos. Okay. Thank you so much. It has been an interesting class. Thank you so much to our mentors. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow at the closing ceremony. Same time tomorrow, 4 p.m. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amina. And thank you, Leonard. It's always a pleasure to exchange with you too. And all the best to all the mentees on this journey.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Tenny, Fim here. And thank you to Jiipcc and to the mentees. Always a pleasure sharing ideas with you.
Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your days. Thank you so much, our mentees, for your presentations. Bye.